In this video, we reveal what Theodore Roosevelt said about the men with the muck-rakes. This is Speaking Through the Ages, where we bring back the dead in an attempt to bring out the values, beliefs, and internal struggles of those humans that came before. We give context to and deliver historical speeches that motivated people to kill, riot, make salt, and sign papers. I'm Joseph Delisle, your novice history fan. To join us, subscribe and click the bell for notifications. The year is 1906, and the date is the 14th of April. President Theodore Roosevelt, standing at the cornerstone of a future additional office building for the House of Representatives, known today as the Cannon House Office Building, prepares to give a speech. Now, straight out of history, that speech. Over a century ago, Washington laid the cornerstone of the Capitol in what was then little more than a tract of wooden wilderness here beside the Potomac. We now find it necessary to provide by a great additional buildings for the business of the government. This growth in the need for the housing of the government is but a proof and example of the way in which the nation has grown and the sphere of action of the national government has grown. We now administer the affairs of a nation in which the extraordinary growth of population has been outstripped by the growth of wealth and the growth in complex interest. The material problems that face us today are not such as they were in Washington's time, but the underlying facts of human nature are the same now as they were then. Under altered external form, we war with the same tendencies toward evil that were evident in Washington's time, and are helped by the same tendencies for good. It is about some of these that I wish to say a word today. In Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, you may recall the description of the man with the muck-rake. The man who could look no way but downward, with the muck-rake in his hand, who was offered a celestial crown for his muck-rake, but who would neither look up nor regard the crown he was offered, but continued to rake to himself the filth of the floor. In Pilgrim's Progress, the man with the muck-rake is set forth as the example of him whose vision is fixed on carnal instead of on spiritual things. Yet, he also typifies the man who in this life consistently refuses to see aught that is lofty, and fixes his eyes with solemn intentness only on that which is vile and debasing. Now, it is very necessary that we should not flinch from seeing what is vile and debasing. There is filth on the floor, and it must be scraped up with the muck-rake. And there are times and places where this service is the most needed of all the services that can be performed. But the man who never does anything else, who never thinks or speaks or writes, save of his feats with the muck-rake, speedily becomes not a help to society, not an incitement to good, but one of the most potent forces for evil. There are, in the body politic, economic and social, many and grave evils, and there is urgent necessity for the sternest war upon them. There should be relentless exposure of and attack upon every evil man, whether politician or businessman, every evil practice, whether in politics, in business, or in social life. I hail as a benefactor every writer or speaker, every man who on the platform or in book, magazine, or newspaper, with merciless severity make such attack, provided always that he in his turn remembers that the attack is of use only if it is absolutely truthful. The liar is no whit better than the thief, and if his mendacity takes the form of slander, he may be worse than most thieves. It puts a premium upon knavery untruthfully to attack an honest man, or even with hysterical exaggeration to assail a bad man with untruth. An epidemic of indiscriminate assault upon character does not good, but very great harm. The soul of every scoundrel is gladdened whenever an honest man is assailed, or even when a scoundrel is untruthfully assailed. Now, it is easy to twist out of shape what I have just said, easy to affect to misunderstand it, and, if it is slurred over in repetition, not difficult really to misunderstand it. Some persons are sincerely incapable of understanding that to denounce mudslinging does not mean to endorse the endorsement of whitewashing. And both the interested individuals who need whitewashing and those others who practice mudslinging like to encourage such confusion of ideas. One of the chief counts against those who make indiscriminate assault upon men in business or men in public life is that they invite a reaction which is sure to tell powerfully in favor of the unscrupulous scoundrel who ought to be attacked, who ought to be exposed, who ought, if possible, to be put in the penitentiary. If Aristides is praised overmuch as just, people get tired of hearing it, and over censure of the unjust finally and from similar reasons result in their favor. Any excess is almost sure to invite a reaction, and unfortunately the reaction, instead of taking the form of punishment of those guilty of the excess, is very apt to take the form either of punishment of the unoffending, or of giving immunity and even strengthen the offenders. The effort to make financial or political profit out of the destruction of character can only result in public calamity. Gross and reckless assaults on character, whether on the stump or in newspaper, magazine, or book, create a morbid and vicious public sentiment, and at the same time act as a profound deterrent to able men of normal sensitiveness and tend to prevent them from entering public service at any price. As an instance in point, I may mention that only serious difficult encountered in getting the right type of men to dig the Panama Canal is the certainty that they will be exposed both without and I'm sorry to say, sometimes within Congress, to utterly reckless assaults on their character and capacity. At the risk of repetition, let me say again that my plea is not for immunity to, but for the most unsparing exposure of the politician who betrays his trust, or the big businessman who makes or spends his fortune in illegitimate or corrupt ways. There should be a resolute effort to hunt every such man out of the position he has disgraced, expose the crime, and hunt down the criminal. But remember that even in the case of crime, if it is attacked in sensational, lurid, and untruthful fashion, the attack may do more damage to the public mind than the crime itself. It is because I feel that there should be no rest in the endless war against the forces of evil, that I ask that the war be conducted with sanity as well as with resolution. The men with the muck-rakes are often indispensable to the well-being of society, but only if they know when to stop raking the muck and to look upward to the celestial crown above them, to the crown of worthy endeavor. There are beautiful things above and round about them, and if they gradually grow to feel that the whole world is nothing but muck, their power of usefulness is gone. If the whole picture is painted black, there remains no hue whereby to single out the rascals for distinction from their fellows. Such painting finally induces a kind of moral colorblindness, and people affected by it come to the conclusion that no man is really black and no man is really white, but they are all gray. In other words, they neither believe in the truth of the attack nor in the honesty of the man who is attacked. They grow as suspicious of the accusation as of the offense. It becomes well nigh hopelessness to stir them either to wrath against wrongdoing or to enthusiasm for what is right. And such a mental attitude in the public gives hope to every knave, and is the despair of honest men. To assail the great and admitted evils of our political and industrial life with such crude and sweeping generalizations as to include decent men in the general condemnation means the searing of the public conscience. There results a general attitude either of cynical belief in and indifference to public corruption, or else of distrustful inability to discriminate between the good and the bad. Either attitude is fraught with untold damage to the country as a whole. The fool who has not sense to discriminate between what is good and what is bad is well nigh as dangerous as the man who does discriminate and yet chooses the bad. There is nothing more distressing to every good patriot, to every good American, than the hard, scoffing spirit which treats the allegations of dishonesty in a public man as a cause for laughter. Such laughter is worse than the crackling of thorns under a pot, for it denotes not merely the vacant mind, but the heart in which high emotions have been choked before they could grow to fruition. There isn't any amount of good in the world, and there was never a time when loftier and more disinterested work for the betterment of mankind was being done than now. The forces that tend for evil are great and terrible, but the forces of truth and love and courage and honesty and generosity and sympathy are also stronger than ever before. It is foolish and timid, no less than a wicked thing, to blink the fact that the forces of evil are strong. But it is even worse to fail to take into account the strength of the forces that tell for good. Hysterical sensationalism is the very poorest weapon wherewith to fight for lasting righteousness. The men who, with stern sobriety and truth, assail the many evils of our time, whether in the public press or in magazines or in books, are the leaders and allies of all engaged in the work for social and political betterment. But if they give good reason for distrust of what they say, if they chill the ardor of those who demand truth as a primary virtue, they thereby betray the good cause and play into the hands of the very men of whom they are nominally at war. In his Ecclesiastical Polity, that fine old Elizabethan divine, Bishop Hooker, wrote, quote, "He that goeth about to persuade a multitude that they are not so well governed as they ought to be, shall never want attentive and favorable hearers. because they know the manifold effects whereunto every kind of regimen is subject, but the secret lets and difficulties, which in public proceedings are innumerable and inevitable, they have not ordinarily the judgment to consider." Unquote. This truth should be kept constantly in mind by every free people desiring to preserve the sanity and poise indispensable to the permanent success of self-government. Yet, on the other hand, it is vital not to permit this spirit to sanity and self-command to degenerate into mere mental stagnation. Bad though a state of hysterical excitement is, and evil though the results are which come from the violent oscillations such excitements invariably produces, yet a sodden acquiescence in evil is even worse. At this moment, we are passing through a period of great unrest, social, political, and industrial unrest. It is of the utmost importance for our future that this should prove to be not the unrest of mere rebelliousness against life, of mere dissatisfaction with the inevitable inequality of conditions, but the unrest of a resolute and eager ambition to secure the betterment of the individual and the nation. So far as this movement of agitation throughout the country takes the form of fierce discontent with evil, of a determination to punish the authors of evil, whether in industry or politics, the feeling is to be heartily welcomed as a sign of healthy life. If, on the other hand, it turns into a mere crusade of appetite against appetite, of contest between the brutal greed of the have-nots and the brutal greed of the haves, then it has no significance for good, but only for evil. If it seeks to establish a line of cleavage, not along the line which divides good men from bad, but along that other line, running at a right angle thereto, which divides those who are well off from those who are less well off, then it will be fraught with the immeasurable harm to the body politic. We can no more and no less afford to condone evil in the man of capital than evil in the man of no capital. The wealthy man who exults because there is a failure of injustice in the effort to bring some trust magnet to an account for his misdeeds is as bad as, and no worse than, the so-called labor leader who clamorously strives to excite a foul class feeling on behalf of some other labor leader who is implicated in murder. One attitude is as bad as the other and no worse. In each case, the accused is entitled to exact justice, and in neither case is there a need of action by others who can be construed into an expression of sympathy for crime. It is a prime necessity that if the present unrest is to result in permanent good, the emotions shall be translated into action, and that action shall be marked by honesty, sanity, and self-restraint. There is mighty little good in a mere spasm of reform. The reform that counts is that which comes through steady, continuous growth. Violent emotionalism leads to exhaustion, and it is important to these people to grapple with the problems connected with the amassing of enormous fortunes and the use of those fortunes, both corporate and individual, in business. We should discriminate in the sharpest ways between fortunes well won and fortunes ill won, between those gained as an incident to performing great service to the community as a whole, and those gained in evil fashion by keeping just within the limits of mere law honesty. Of course, no amount of charity in spending such fortunes in any way compensates for misconduct in making them. As a matter of personal conviction, and without pretending to discuss the details of or formulate the system, I feel that we shall ultimately have to consider the adoption of some such scheme as that of a progressive tax on all fortunes. Beyond a certain amount, either given in life or devised or bequeathed upon death to any individual, a tax so framed as to put it out of the power of the owner of one of those enormous fortunes to hand on more than a certain amount to any one individual. The tax, of course, to be imposed by the national and not the state government. Such taxation should, of course, be aimed merely at the inheritance or transmission in their entirety of those fortunes swollen beyond healthy limits. Again, the national government must in some form exercise supervision over corporations engaged in interstate business, and all large corporations are engaged in interstate business, whether by license or otherwise, so as to permit us to deal with the far-reaching evils of overcapitalization. This year we are making a beginning in the direction of serious effort to settle some of these economic problems by the railway rate legislation. Such legislation, if so framed, as I am sure it will be, as to secure definite and tangible results, will amount to something of itself and will amount to a great deal more insofar as it is taken as a first step in the direction of a policy of superintendence and control over corporate wealth engaged in interstate commerce. This superintendence and control not to be exercised in a spirit of malevolence toward the men who have created the wealth, but with the firm purpose both to do justice to them and to see that they in their turn do justice to the public at large. The first requisite in the public servant who are to deal in this shape with corporations, whether as legislation or as executives, is honesty. This honesty can be no respecter of persons. There can be no such thing as a unilateral honesty. The danger is not really from corrupt corporations. It springs from the corruption itself, whether exercised for or against corporations. The 8th commandment reads, "Thou shalt not steal." It does not read, "Thou shalt not steal from the rich man." It does not read, "Thou shalt not steal from the poor man." It simply plainly reads, "Thou shalt not steal." No good whatever will come from the warped and mock morality which denounces the misdeeds of men of wealth and forgets the misdeeds practiced at their expense, which denounces bribery, but blinds itself to blackmail, which forms with rage if a corporation secures favors by improper methods, and merely leers with hideous mirth if the corporation is itself wronged. The only public servant who can be trusted honestly to protect the rights of the public against the misdeeds of a corporation is that public man who will just as surely protect the corporation itself from wrongful aggression. If a public man is willing to yield to popular clamor and do wrong to the man of the wealth or to rich corporations, it may set down as certain that if the opportunity comes, he will secretly and furtively do wrong to the public in the interest of a corporation. But in addition to honesty, we need sanity. No honesty will make public man useful if that man is timid or foolish, if he is a hot-headed zealot or an impractical visionary. As we strive for reform, we find that it is not at all merely the case of a long uphill pull. On the contrary, there is almost as much of breaching work as of collar work. To depend only on traces means that there will soon be a runaway and an upset. The men of wealth who today are trying to prevent the regulation and control of their businesses in the interest of the public by the proper government authorities will not succeed, in my judgment, in checking the progress of the movement. But if they did succeed, they would find that they would have sown the wind and would surely reap the whirlwind, for they would ultimately provoke the violent excess which accompany a reform coming by convulsion instead of by steady and natural growth. On the other hand, the wild preachers of unrest and discontent, the wild agitators against the entire existing order, the men who act crookedly, whether because of sinister design or for mere puzzle-headedness, the men who preach destruction without proposing any substitute for what they intend to destroy, or propose a substitute which would be far worse than the existing evils. All these men are the most dangerous opponents of real reform. If they get their way, they will lead the people into a deeper pit than any into which they could fall under the present system. If they fail to get their way, they will still do incalculable harm by provoking the kind of reaction which, in its revolt against the senseless evil of their teaching, would enthrone more securely than ever the very evils which their misguided followers believe they are attacking. More important than aught else is the development of the broadest sympathy of man for man, the welfare of the wage worker, the welfare of the tiller of the soil. Upon these depend the welfare of the entire country. Their good is not to be sought in pulling down others, but their good must be the prime object of all our statesmanship. Materially, we strive to secure a broader economic opportunity for all men, so that each shall have a better chance to show the stuff of which he is made. Spiritually and ethically, we must strive to bring about clean living and right thinking. We appreciate that the things of the body are important, but we appreciate also that the things of the soul are immeasurably more important. The foundation stone of national life, and ever must be, is and ever must be the high individual character of the average citizen. We hope you enjoyed this historical moment. Thank you for joining. Don't be afraid to light up that subscribe button. See you next time, where the dead teach.